the identifying patient within the dysfunctional family. This is often the child who was selected, sometimes unconsciously, by the narcissistic parents and or grandparents to be the scapegoat child within the dysfunctional family. So I'm going to be breaking down what IP is within the dysfunctional family run by a narcissistic parent. I'm going to be going a little bit deeper into that, so I want to forewarn everyone, if this is a video that you think is best to sit out on, please check my archives and look at another video that's related to dysfunctional families run by a narcissistic parent or scapegoats, okay, or scapegoated children within the dysfunctional family run by narcissistic parents. Okay, I just want to go ahead and forewarn that some of the information that I'm going to be sharing in today's video, some viewers may find a little bit disturbing. Okay, so of course I'm going to be going over a few tools, a few points, and I'm also going to add a few critical questions in today's video. Okay, so having said all that, I want to thank everyone in advance for his or her time. Stay tuned for the video. Okay, first point. Often within dysfunctional families headed by narcissistic parents, there is one child who is possibly selected unconsciously to act as a scapegoat in order to serve the interests of their dysfunctional family. Next point. The personality structure of the narcissistic parents and or grandparents are usually the most invalidating to the child who has been selected to play the dysfunctional role of scapegoat. It might not be surprising that these personality structures often clash. Sometimes the child who is selected by the narcissistic parents and or grandparents to be scapegoat, sometimes they're more gifted, if not talented, than the narcissistic parents and or grandparents. Sometimes they're more intuitive, but there's something about the child that really makes him or her stand out from the narcissistic parents and or grandparents. Usually whatever it is about the child that stands out to the narcissistic parents and or grandparents is deemed as a threat to their false self-images. Let's move forward. The scapegoated child has a personality structure that his or her narcissistic parents find the most challenging to their false self-images. The identified patient, or IP, child is blamed by their narcissistic parents, grandparents, and siblings for any and all family challenges. So anything that the narcissistic parents and or grandparents finds disturbing or unsettling about the family, the child is usually blamed for it. Pardon me, the IP child is usually blamed. And to make matters worse, the narcissistic parents and or grandparents groom their siblings to join in on the blame game. Okay, so the child who is tagged to be a scapegoat, or the IP child, usually has no support in that dysfunctional family. It can be generations of alcoholics, generations of drug users, gamblers, whatever it is that makes the family dysfunctional. Unfortunately, the IP child is blamed for it all. And to make matters worse, there's sibling rivalry that is not average. It's not your typical sibling rivalry, because you have the narcissistic parents who are grooming the siblings to bully the IP child. And it doesn't matter if the IP child is the eldest, the middle child, or the youngest. Doesn't matter. Whoever the IP child is, or the child who has been selected to be the scapegoat in the dysfunctional family, unfortunately, they are blamed for whatever the ills happen to be in the dysfunctional family. Now I'd like to go ahead and share with you all how the narcissistic parents and or grandparents run the dysfunctional family like a cult leader, which alienates the scapegoated child or the IP child even further.
The malignant narcissist has a a desire deep down of bringing down other people in a way that they feel brought down. And that leads to extremes.
According to Kilduff's research, people were working inhumane hours, often 7 days a week, on the temple's various programs. At the temple itself, members were forced to confess to fabricated crimes for which they would be given vicious beatings. Ex-members asserted even children were being abused in this way. According to their descriptions, Jones was a classic cult leader, using spirituality to exert power psychologically and sexually over his cult. Cults share certain defining characteristics. In a cult, leaders recruit members through deceptive techniques that rob them of their identity and individuality. Experts have termed these techniques thought reform.
Thought reform is a systematic effort which has two stages. One is the breakdown stage with heavy confession and a breakdown of one's own psychic integrity. And then there's the second stage, which is re-education, trying to remake a person into a new person.
The term brainwashing is a popular term describing what's classically called a thought reform program. And all those terms mean that a person or an organization has put into place a coordinated program of coercive influence and behavior control. See, the word cult refers to the relationship between the followers and the leader, in which the leader is all powerful. And then the way the leaders, as we say in psychology, shape the behavior, make the person adopt the policies and attitudes, is done through a thought reform program. Merely puts into place ways to get you to put your own value system aside and make your decisions based on what you know the cult leader wants and will reward. But you're still making decisions, but you're making them in the context of what will keep you from getting in trouble and what will get you rewards within the cult. But brainwashing doesn't make a zombie.
Characteristics of cults. Unclear expectations. Bottom line is never clear. The desires, needs, expectations, and well-being of the cult leader is priority. Thought reform programs. Deception. Hidden agendas. Destabilization. Controlled environment and thinking time. Dependency and dread, creating a sense of fear, powerlessness, and anxiety. Disconnection, suppressing old attitudes and behavioral patterns. Development of pseudo-personality of the cult, acting out new behaviors and attitudes. Denial and dedication, restricting criticism while maintaining a limited system of logic. Cult inducement techniques, voice tones and voice control, praise and punishment, all or nothing mentality in language, such as us against them, interrupted sleep patterns, certain repeated words and phrases, mixed messages to invoke fear, uncertainty, and hopelessness. Now, some of the cult inducement techniques, as well as the cult characteristics, some of us are already recognizing. Some of these things go on within a dysfunctional family headed by narcissistic parents and or grandparents, such as some of the diabolical tactics that the narcissistic parents engage in order to obtain the narcissistic supply. Tool number 1. Increase your research on the topic of identified patient or IP within the dysfunctional families. Tool number 2, keep a journal. Tool number 3, take steps to become more accustomed to existing as a person who no longer invests in dysfunctional relationships. Critical questions. Critical question number 1. Do you feel and or think that you are betraying your family by thriving forward? If so, why? If not, why not? Critical question number 2. How much support are you currently receiving from your loved ones? If you are receiving support, is it satisfactory? Third and final critical question. How comfortable are you expressing how you feel and what you think? Do you know what you feel and or think? References and resources. In the description box below, you will find the references and resources.
By what age is the narcissistic invisible script fully downloaded? The correct answer is B, 7 years old. By this age, subconscious patterns are already shaping behavior.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're taking a deep, structured look into something that affects countless people, yet it remains widely misunderstood. We're going to break down the complex and often entirely hidden architecture of a narcissistic family system. If you've ever felt like your family dynamic is something straight out of a psychological thriller, but you just couldn't quite put your finger on the mechanics of it, well, you are definitely in the right place. We aren't just going to look at the abuse itself. We're going to unpack the actual system, and most importantly, how to break free and actually thrive.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're starting with a narcissistic family architecture, then diving into the roles of scapegoats and phantoms. After that, we'll examine the toll of trauma, explore waking up to reality, and finally, share some actionable tools to thrive forward.
All right, part 1, the narcissistic family architecture. You know, to really understand this, we have to draw a stark line. A typical dysfunctional family might be messy, sure, driven by untreated neuroses, reactive behaviors, or just poor coping skills. But the key here is that there's often a latent capacity for empathy and eventual collective healing. A narcissistic family system, on the other hand, it's an entirely different beast. It functions essentially like a high-control cult. It's governed by a head of household with a cluster B personality disorder, which means their behavior is highly erratic, traumatic, and manipulative. And this leader operates with methodical precision. Their goal isn't family harmony. It's extracting what we call narcissistic supply, that emotional energy and reaction they desperately need to sustain their fragile false self-image. Because they literally require the family to stay sick to serve their needs, there is virtually zero capacity for collective healing.
And here's the really wild part. Outsiders, even doctors and therapists, rarely see this abuse. Why? Because the narcissistic leader is an absolute expert at going stealth. They hide a highly abusive domestic environment behind a perfectly crafted public veneer. Out in the world, they might look like the perfect parent, a massively successful professional, or a pillar of their religious community. This stealth camouflage is a deliberate tactic. It completely tricks the outside world into validating the narcissist's false narrative, which leaves the victims trapped inside feeling totally invisible.
Moving on to part 2, scapegoats and phantoms. Inside this closed system, rigid roles are assigned to maintain absolute control. And the narcissist doesn't just pick a child at random to punish. No, they usually target the most intuitive child, the one who can actually see through the dysfunction and the lies. Because this child sees the truth, they're a direct threat to the narcissist's false self-image. So what happens? They are systematically outcasted, demonized, and basically turned into a human wastebasket to carry all the blame for the family's toxic behaviors. It is an incredibly vicious, invisible form of abuse.
And everything in this system is a highly orchestrated performance. The ringleader doesn't just abuse the scapegoat directly. They actively isolate them by grooming other family members to gang up on them, essentially turning them into flying monkeys, enablers who just do the abuser's bidding. Which brings us to the real tragedy of the phantoms. The scapegoated child helplessly watches as their siblings, or maybe the other parent, are transformed into these phantoms. Because these family members have chosen blind loyalty to the narcissist, whether out of pure fear or manipulation, genuine connection with them becomes completely impossible. You simply cannot have healthy conflict resolution or true intimacy with a phantom who is just operating as a literal extension of the abuser.
To orchestrate these phantoms and keep the scapegoat isolated, the narcissist relies heavily on divide and conquer tactics. A huge one, encouraging sibling rivalry well into adulthood. By feeding siblings lies about each other based on manufactured perceptions rather than reality, the narcissist ensures everyone remains at odds. Add in some ritualistic character assassination, extreme gaslighting to make the victim feel like they're living in the twilight zone, and the ultimate silent treatment, and boom, you have a system designed to keep the family fractured. They can never unite against the real abuser. The children exist merely as a source of supply for the parent's ego.
This takes us to part 3, the toll of trauma. Now, general trauma naturally brings about shock, avoidance, and fear, but narcissistic abuse, it adds highly specific maladaptive traits. When you're raised in a system with literally zero emotional safety, your fight or flight response goes into complete overdrive. You become obsessed over how to please the narcissist just to survive. You become overly focused on your own mistakes and constantly question your own sanity because of the relentless gaslighting. This hypervigilance isn't just anxiety, it's your brain desperately trying to navigate a minefield every single day.
And enduring this level of adversity doesn't just affect the mind. The human body physically remembers trauma. When a child's hormonal and immune systems are exposed to early, repeated, and toxic amounts of stress, it actually alters their physical development. Later in life, this manifests as severe health consequences. We're talking about complex PTSD, severe anxiety, deep depression, and even physical ailments like heart disease and autoimmune issues. Your body literally bears the physical burden of the system's toxicity.
Let's move to part 4, waking up to reality.
Reaching the point where you truly see the system for what it is can be terrifying, but it often starts with one single, powerful question. Do you feel emotionally safe? Asking yourself this triggers a massive reality check. When you realize that you aren't safe, the illusion shatters, and honestly, it can feel like the ground has just completely disappeared from beneath your feet. When that floor vanishes, you're faced with some really harsh realities. You realize the relationship you thought you were holding on to has absolutely zero stability. You're basically grasping at thin air. You finally see the imaginary contract the narcissist drew up for you. And do you know what the fine print of that contract is? It demands that you sit down, shut up, and take it. You're never allowed to use your voice. And when you do finally start using your voice and setting boundaries, you have to acknowledge a really painful truth. The narcissist is not going to be on board for this new you. They will reject it, and they will likely retaliate because you're cutting off their supply.
Which brings us to the most important part of our explainer, part 5, tools to thrive forward. Let's translate all of this into actionable steps for recovery. Step 1 is huge. Give yourself absolute permission to say no. This completely shatters the narcissist's control, even though you know they're going to punish you with the silent treatment. Step 2 is reclaiming your energy. You are responsible only for yourself and your well-being, not for fixing the dysfunctional family you were born into. They had years to build a healthy relationship with you, and they chose not to. Step 3 is curating a completely new support base of people who actually share your values. And Step 4 is finding constructive ways to reduce stress and process the entirely justified anger from those painful childhood experiences. Now, building a completely new support base might feel super overwhelming at first, especially if you're accustomed to isolation. But finding people who resonate with your principles, it's a total game changer. When you combine that new community with constructive relaxation and peace, you physically shift your body out of that maladaptive fight or flight mode. You literally become your own best problem solver.
As you do this work, you have to take a moment and honestly ask yourself, what is the true purpose of your current relationship with this dysfunctional family? How have you experienced them, and why do you continue to honor that dynamic? Most importantly, do you remain stuck in your own ego or emotional hopes regarding them? Recognizing these stuck points confirms reality and stops you from investing your precious time and energy into a bottomless pit.
There's a core message every survivor needs to hear. Just like a luminous star, it's in the darkness. And no matter how dark it gets, you can still shine. Despite the darkness of being systematically outcasted, your journey has profound meaning. You survived the system, and now you have the choice to thrive. You absolutely do not need their permission to get your glow on and live a healthy, connected life.
Every life has a story, and your life has a distinct purpose. The narcissist tried to render you a silent accomplice in their phantom family, but you hold the pen to your own narrative now. I want to leave you with this final thought to really challenge you. Now that you clearly see the hidden architecture of this system and the imaginary contract they bound you to, what is the very first boundary you are going to set today to reclaim your voice?
The subtle contrast between dysfunction and pathology. In a typical dysfunctional family, the harm is unintentional. In a narcissist-headed family, the abuse is intentional and hidden. One can heal together, while the other requires a scapegoat. Out of the shadows, breaking the cycle of narcissistic abuse. the systemic mechanics of intergenerational trauma and the biological imperative of going no contact. This is the path to growth and transformation.
Step number one, point number one, tool number one, discontinue to carry the shame of the narcissistic parent.
Imagine like a highly structured, totally ruthless cult.
Okay.
But instead of some remote compound out in the wilderness somewhere, the headquarters is just a suburban living room.
Oh, wow.
Right. And the enforcers, they're your own siblings. And that charismatic, completely untouchable leader, it's someone you just call mom or dad.
It's a terrifying image, honestly, because it completely shatters our fundamental assumptions about safety, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we are all conditioned to believe the home is a sanctuary. But in this specific architecture, the home is actually, well, it's a psychological panopticon.
Panopticon.
Right. Every single move is monitored, and every relationship is weaponized to just serve one person.
Which brings us to today's topic.
Okay.
Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today, we are decoding the hidden architecture of the narcissistic family system.
It's such an important topic.
It really is. And, you know, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, my family was difficult, sure, but they weren't a cult, ask yourself this one question.
Let's hear it.
Were you allowed to have a separate reality from your parents without being punished for it?
Oof. That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Because our mission today is to break down exactly how this covert control operates, and more importantly, equip you with a practical toolkit to actually break that cycle of dysfunction.
And to do that, we are synthesizing some incredibly powerful frameworks from Luminousz Ztarr. We're specifically pulling from concepts like breaking the script, orchestrating phantoms, and the 333 framework.
Yeah, the 333 framework is amazing.
It really is, because this isn't just about, labeling bad behavior. It's about understanding the mechanical gears of a highly predatory system so you can finally dismantle its hold on you.
So let's start with that crucial distinction, because usually when we talk about family dysfunction, there's this expectation of a messy, chaotic environment, right?
Sure, people yelling, feelings getting hurt.
Exactly, boundaries are crossed. But fundamentally, people want things to get better. I like to think of it like a leaky boat.
A leaky boat. I like that.
Yeah, like everyone is clumsily trying to bail out the water. They might accidentally hit each other with the buckets in the chaos, but they all ultimately want the boat to stay afloat.
That is the perfect way to describe typical dysfunction, because the harm in a leaky boat scenario is reactive.
Reactive, right.
It usually stems from untreated mental illness, maybe addiction, or just a severe inability to cope with external stress. But here's the key difference.
Okay.
Those individuals, as messy as they are, retain the capacity for self-reflection.
Oh, so they can actually see what they're doing.
Eventually, yes. If the crisis passes, or if there is a real intervention, they can wake up, recognize their harmful patterns, and actually engage in collective healing.
But a narcissistic family
Operates on a completely different psychological paradigm.
because it's not a leaky boat at all. It's a pirate ship,
Yes.
and the captain is intentionally drilling holes in the hull just to keep the crew terrified and desperate, all while demanding constant praise for being such a brave captain during this manufactured crisis.
What a profound way to visualize it. The captain in this scenario has a cluster B personality profile, like narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And to understand this structurally, cluster B disorders are characterized by very dramatic, erratic, highly emotional behavior.
But it's not just random chaos, is it?
Not at all. Beneath that erratic surface is a rigid, desperate need to maintain a false self-image. Because their true self-esteem is fundamentally shattered, the abuse isn't a messy accident of poor coping skills, it is methodical.
So the goal of drilling the holes, of creating that constant state of panic and subjugation, it's entirely self-serving.
Completely. It is the relentless extraction of what we call narcissistic supply.
Narcissistic supply, like psychological oxygen.
Exactly like oxygen for them. And it can be adoration and praise, sure, but it can just as easily be your fear, your frustration, or your tears.
Well, anything that gets a reaction.
Yes. Any reaction that proves they have power over your emotional state validates their existence. And because this pathology is structurally fixed in their personality, the chances of the family collectively healing are basically zero.
Zero. That is grim. But if the dynamic is that predatory, how does the outside world not see it? You'd think teachers, neighbors, or even therapists would spot a pirate ship immediately.
You would think so. But they don't see it because the narcissistic leader is a master of camouflage.
They hide it.
They construct a public veneer that directly contradicts their private abuse. I mean, they might be a pillar of the community, a wildly successful professional, or someone heavily involved in charity.
Oh, like the saintly volunteer who is actually a monster at home.
Precisely. They groom the outside world just as effectively as they groom their family, which creates a terrifying reality for the victims. When the victim finally tries to speak up, the outside world gaslights them, which just reinforces the narcissist's narrative.
Which means the control has to start incredibly early to ensure the kids play along with this facade.
Very early.
Luminousz's work outlines this concept of the invisible script. How exactly does a parent program a child to participate in their own subjugation?
Well, we have to look at developmental psychology here. Before the age of 7, a child's brain operates primarily in theta waves.
Theta waves, so they're like...
They are essentially a sponge without a critical filter. They physically cannot differentiate between objective reality and what their caregivers tell them.
They just absorb it all as truth.
Exactly. And the narcissistic parent exploits this exact window to download an invisible script right into the child's subconscious. The child is conditioned to believe their sole purpose for existing is to regulate the parent's emotions.
And uphold the family's flawless image, I imagine.
Yes, and that comes with what the framework calls the imaginary contract.
The imaginary contract, what are the terms of that?
The unwritten rule is brutally simple. Sit down, shut up, and take it.
Jeez.
You are not an autonomous human being. You are an extension of the leader.
I mean, if that level of subconscious programming happens before a child even hits 2nd grade, does the child even develop a core self? Or is their entire personality just a highly calibrated trauma response?
I'm so glad you asked that because this brings up a profound existential fear for many survivors. The core self absolutely exists.
Okay, that's a relief.
It was never destroyed, but it was suppressed by an overwhelming biological imperative: survival.
Because they're completely dependent.
Right. A child knows, on an instinctual level, that if they alienate their caregiver, they die. If the caregiver demands the suppression of the child's authentic needs in exchange for food, shelter, and basic safety,
the child's brain will just seamlessly lock away that core self to keep the physical body alive.
Exactly. It's the ultimate hostage situation.
And to keep the hostages from realizing they outnumber the captor, the narcissist has to keep them divided, right?
Divide and conquer is the bedrock of this architecture. The parent deliberately engineers conflict between the siblings.
So they're turning them against each other.
Yes, through triangulation. Whispering false narratives about one sibling to another, ensuring the children are constantly competing for scraps of approval.
Because if they're fighting each other,
they will never compare notes. They will never realize the parent is the actual architect of their misery.
So if the goal is absolute control and preventing the children from uniting, the narcissist wouldn't just treat all the kids equally poorly, they'd assign specific roles to keep the system off balance.
The roles are incredibly rigid. The most recognizable are the golden child and the scapegoat.
The golden child being the favorite.
Right. They serve as the projection of the narcissist's grandiosity. They are idealized, often exempted from the rules, and essentially trained to look down on the other siblings.
But I'm guessing the status comes with strings attached.
Oh, absolutely. Their position is entirely conditional on perfect compliance.
And then there's the scapegoat, the family's designated human wastebasket. But why single out one specific child for that kind of psychological torture?
Why do you say?
Well, it seems like if you want absolute control, you target the weakest link, right? Or wait, is it actually the opposite? Do they target the child who sees through the facade?
You've hit the exact nerve of the system. The scapegoat is rarely the weakest. They are almost always the most intuitive and empathetic member of the family.
Oh, wow. So they can see the reality of what's happening.
Yes, they have a natural ability to perceive the emotional reality of the household. They see that the emperor has no clothes.
And that intuition is a massive neurological threat to a cluster B parent.
Huge threat.
If the parent's entire survival depends on this false reality, a child who asks questions isn't just annoying. They are a literal threat to the parent's psychological existence.
Which means the scapegoat must be neutralized. But the narcissist rarely does this directly. They orchestrate what Ztarr calls phantoms.
Phantoms, like flying monkeys.
Exactly. The flying monkeys, the enablers, the complicit relatives. The narcissist manipulates these phantoms into enforcing the imaginary contract for them.
So the family does the dirty work.
Yes, they run coordinated smear campaigns, characterizing the scapegoat as crazy, unstable, or malicious. The narcissist plays the victim, and the phantoms rush in to attack the scapegoat to protect the leader.
Wow. And the narcissist just gets to sit back and watch.
And they get a massive hit of supply watching their family tear the intuitive child apart on their behalf.
I have to push back here, just on behalf of anyone listening who has been the scapegoat.
Sure.
It is agonizing to look at your siblings, your aunts, people you grew up with, and accept that they are just phantoms. Aren't these enablers also victims of the same programming?
They are.
So doesn't the scapegoat have, like, an ethical obligation to try and wake them up? To present the facts and save them from the cult?
It is a deeply empathetic impulse, but engaging with that impulse is exactly how the system traps you. We have to look at the mechanics of consensus reality.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
The phantoms have chosen, whether consciously or subconsciously, blind loyalty out of fear or convenience. If you try to save them by presenting evidence of the abuse, you are expecting a rational response from people who have surrendered their rationality for safety.
Because reasoning with them isn't about the truth for them. It's about system stability.
Exactly.
If they agree with you, they become the new target.
Precisely. And more importantly, by staying engaged, arguing, and trying to prove your innocence to the phantoms, you are still actively feeding the machine.
You're giving them the reaction.
You are providing the exact drama and emotional distress the narcissistic leader engineered the conflict to extract. True intimacy or conflict resolution with phantoms is structurally impossible.
Which brings us to the physical reality of staying in this war zone. We aren't just talking about hurt feelings or, needing a few therapy sessions. The physiological toll of this environment is devastating.
The physical damage is absolutely measurable. Growing up in a narcissistic system involves chronic high-stress adversity, which is categorized as AC, adverse childhood experiences.
ACs, right.
When a child is constantly navigating unpredictable emotional violence, their HPA axis, the body's stress response system, is prominently activated.
So they're just flooded with cortisol 24/7.
Yes. And over time, that toxic stress literally washes over the developing brain, altering its physical structure.
He changes the brain.
It shrinks the hippocampus, which handles memory and learning, and it hypertrophies or enlarges the amygdala, which is the fear center.
That's terrifying.
And it goes beyond the brain. This constant state of inflammation attaches chemical tags to your DNA, a process called epigenetics, which can actually turn off immune responses or activate disease-causing genes.
Epigenetics. So we were talking about tangible health crises later in life.
Severe ones. Complex PTSD, severe anxiety, and depression are just the psychological manifestations. Physically, survivors face exponentially higher risks for autoimmune disorders, heart disease, chronic pain, and, as the research indicates, even certain cancers.
So walking away isn't just about finding peace. It is quite literally a matter of life and death.
It truly is.
But if your body is actively breaking down, and the phantoms will never wake up, how do you stop the physical and psychological damage? How do you actually get out of the cult?
Healing begins with what Luminousz Ztarr defines as the core cognitive shift.
The core cognitive shift.
You have to internalize a radical and often very painful truth. Yesterday is gone forever, and there is fundamentally nothing to correct.
Wait, nothing to correct? That feels deeply unjust. I mean, the narcissist has done horrific things. Shouldn't they be forced to correct their behavior?
In a just world, yes, absolutely. But demanding justice from a fixed pathology is a trap.
A trap.
The survivor stays tethered to the abuser, waiting for an apology that is clinically impossible for the narcissist to give. The cognitive shift requires accepting the unequal yoke.
The unequal yoke, meaning carrying different weights, like you have grown, but they haven't.
Yes. The survivor has developed emotional maturity, empathy, and complexity. The narcissist is emotionally stunted. They are permanently operating with the emotional regulation of a toddler. You simply cannot expect a toddler to take accountability for systemic abuse.
It's like trying to reason with them is like trying to pay off a debt at a bank that doesn't accept your currency.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Right. Like you can walk in there every day with your logical arguments, your emotional maturity, all your evidence of harm, but the exchange rate is zero. The teller just stares at you. If you want to survive, you have to stop making deposits.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanism of the gray rock method.
The gray rock method.
Yes. When you cannot entirely avoid the narcissist or the phantoms, you stop giving them currency. You make yourself as uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally flat as a gray rock.
So you give them nothing.
If they accuse you of something outrageous, you don't defend yourself. You just say, okay, or I see you feel that way.
You starve them of the reaction they need to survive.
Exactly. By responding objectively rather than reacting emotionally, you cut off their narcissistic supply. They will escalate at first, what we call an extinction burst, but eventually they have to look elsewhere for their fuel.
But gray rock is essentially a defensive shield, right? It stops the bleeding. If a survivor wants to pick up the sword and reclaim their autonomy, surviving isn't the same as living. We need to transition from victim to what the framework calls a thriver.
This is where we implement the Thriver's Toolkit. And the most critical and honestly often the most difficult tool is going no contact.
Going no contact sounds clean and logical on paper. You cut off the toxic source. But in reality, how do you manage the crushing, paralyzing guilt?
The guilt is immense.
Because society, movies, well-meaning friends, they constantly bombard you with family is everything, or you only get one mother.
That societal conditioning is the hardest hurdle because it triggers that deep childhood fear of abandonment. But the framework offers a brilliant structural pivot here using the 3-3-3 framework.
Okay, let's break down this 3-3-3 framework. How does it neutralize the guilt?
First, you take 3 seconds to pause and ground yourself in your current physical reality. This breaks the immediate trauma response.
Okay, 3 seconds to pause.
Second, you ask 3 analytical questions to determine the relationship's ROI, the return on investment.
ROI, treating it like a business.
Exactly. You ask, does this person respect my boundaries? Does interacting with them drain my physical health? Does this relationship offer any genuine mutual support?
You start evaluating the relationship like a forensic accountant.
Yes.
Because if a business partner was stealing your money, lying to your face, and actively destroying your immune system, you wouldn't keep investing in the company just because you've known them for 20 years.
You would dissolve the partnership immediately. Why do we accept a negative ROI in our families that we would never accept anywhere else?
That's a powerful perspective.
Nope, contact is not an act of spite or vengeance. You are not burning a bridge. The abuser burned the bridge years ago through relentless exploitation. No contact is simply you refusing to stand in the ashes.
Refusing to stand in the ashes. I love that. And the final step of the 3-3-3 framework.
It's taking 3 definitive actions to enforce that boundary, whether that's blocking a number, redirecting an email to a spam folder, or simply declining an invitation.
Okay, so once you've enforced no contact, you have all this quiet space. But you still have that invisible script running in your subconscious, right? The sit down, shut up programming. How do you actually rewrite the software of your own brain?
You leverage neuroplasticity. You have to intentionally overwrite the subconscious grooming through what Luminousz Ztarr calls GPS goals with purpose.
GPS.
You cannot wait for the narcissistic system to give you permission to exist because your non-existence is what sustains them.
So GPS is about directing your energy inward.
It requires focused intention techniques. This means actively defining your personal vision, your passions, and your firm boundaries.
What does that look like in practice?
You might do this through rigorous journaling or somatic therapies to release the trapped trauma in your physical body, or literally recording yourself speaking your truth and listening back to it.
Wow, just hearing your own voice.
Exactly. Every time you enforce a boundary or pursue a goal that serves you, you are firing new neural pathways. You are literally rewiring your brain to recognize that your voice matters and that you are no longer the family's human wastebasket.
Taking a step back, the journey we've mapped out today is massive. We moved from recognizing the highly predatory, cult-like architecture of the Cluster B pirate ship to understanding how that invisible script is downloaded into a 7-year-old subconscious.
We examined how the system isolates the intuitive scapegoat by orchestrating phantoms, and we looked at the severe biological toll that toxic stress takes on the body's DNA and immune system.
And crucially, we unpacked the Thriver's Toolkit, the core cognitive shift of realizing the past cannot be fixed, starving the abuser with the gray rock method, using the 3-3-3 framework to evaluate the ROI of your relationships, and ultimately enforcing no contact so you can overwrite the script with your own goals with purpose.
It is the profound evolution from surviving a hostage situation to thriving in your own autonomy.
And here is why this matters, even if you have never experienced this specific brand of familial abuse. The mechanisms of covert control are universal.
They really are.
Evaluating who gets your energy, practicing emotional discipline so you aren't reacting to every provocation in the workplace or the news, And trusting your own intuition over consensus reality, these are vital tools for navigating the modern world.
Absolute vital.
Everyone has a story, and your life has a unique, unshakable purpose that belongs entirely to you.
Ztarr uses a metaphor that I think perfectly encapsulates this journey.
Let's hear it.
No matter how dark the environment gets around you, or how aggressively someone tries to suppress your light, you still possess the internal capacity to shine. You can still get your glow on like a luminous star. The cult only controlled your light because you didn't realize you had the switch.
I love that. You always hold the switch. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We talked extensively about how that invisible script and imaginary contract are written into a child's subconscious to serve someone else's needs. So ask yourself, what other imaginary contracts are you still signing today in your career, your friendships, or your own mind without even realizing it?
That is a question that can change the entire trajectory of your life once you dare to answer it.
Keep exploring. Keep trusting your intuition. And above all else, keep questioning the script.
Why is the scapegoat selected by a narcissistic parent? Is it because they are the weakest or the most resilient? The hint reveals the key, the child who sees the truth. The correct answer is B, they threaten the narcissist's facade.
Welcome to This Explainer. You know, if you've ever felt like your family operates by this set of invisible, punishing rules, today we're going to unpack something truly fascinating and honestly, deeply misunderstood. We're looking at the hidden, cult-like architecture of narcissistic family systems, and more importantly, we're going to learn exactly how to break their invisible script. So let's dive right in with a pretty jarring question, one that challenges everything outsiders usually assume about toxic family dynamics. Is your family just simply dysfunctional, or is it actually functioning as a high-control cult? See, outsiders, and yeah, sometimes even therapists, often look at a chaotic family and just assume it's standard dysfunction. But as our sources reveal, there's a fundamental structural difference here, and it changes absolutely everything about how you survive and eventually heal. And there's a profound difference between the two. In a typical dysfunctional family, the leadership is just messy. It's reactive, mostly driven by untreated trauma, but in a narcissistic system, the intent is entirely predatory. It's focused completely on extracting emotional energy just to feed the leader's false self-image. Because of this, typical families might actually find a capacity for group healing over time. But a narcissistic system? It's fixed. The chance for group recovery is basically slim to none. That means healing really requires an individual exit. Their methods of abuse rely heavily on systemic thought reform, and they manage conflict through things like triangulation and smear campaigns, rather than ever attempting any honest resolution. All right, so let's move into part one, the family as a cult. To really grasp this whole dynamic, we have to zoom in on how a narcissistic household actually functions as a closed system. It's meticulously governed by a central, authoritarian leader. We really have to understand this concept of source supply. So what is that? Well, it's the emotional energy, the praise, the drama, or really any reaction required to sustain the narcissist's highly fragile false self-image. The narcissistic parent literally views their children as property. They're seen as a guaranteed, lifelong source of this supply. And they will prioritize protecting their own false self-image over their child's psychological and spiritual integrity literally every single time.
Which brings us to part two, profiling the identified patient. Within this bizarre theater of control, rigid roles are handed out to make sure that supply just keeps flowing. And that brings us to the identified patient, or the IP. In clinical terms, this is the scapegoat. This person is actively groomed to serve as the family's human wastebasket. The leader deliberately isolates this individual so they can carry all the consequences, the blame, and the shame for all of the group's 4 choices. It's framed almost like a righteous sacrifice, you know? It's a way for the narcissist to artificially cleanse their own collective wickedness and maintain this public veneer of absolute perfection.
Now, you might logically assume the family scapegoat is the weakest link, right? But there is a profound paradox here. The identified patient is actually, usually, the most intuitive and psychologically resilient truth teller in the group. They're the one who inherently sees the giant pink elephant in the room. And honestly, that is exactly why they are targeted. Their inherent health and intuition pose this massive existential threat to the narcissist's dominance, making it absolutely necessary for the leader to systematically break them.
So, how does that happen? Let's look at part 3, subconscious grooming and thought reform.
This psychological trap is meticulously built. They're often downloading an invisible script right into a child's subconscious by the time they're like 7 years old. It happens in this very methodical, 2-stage effort designed to induce permanent dread and powerlessness. Stage 1 is the breakdown stage. This is all about destroying the victim's psychic integrity.
They'll often force the child into heavy confessions for completely fabricated crimes just to justify the abuse. Then, once they're sufficiently broken down, we enter stage 2, the re-education stage. Here, the parent remakes the victim into this compliant pseudo-personality. They are literally conditioned to prioritize the cult leader's needs way above their own identity.
To enforce these rigid roles, the leader utilizes some seriously severe manipulation techniques. We're talking specific voice control to induce disorientation, extreme praise and punishment cycles that just keep the victim completely spellbound. By enforcing this intense us-against-them mentality and even strategically interrupting sleep patterns, the victim is kept in this time-dependent state of chronic exhaustion and anxiety. It is incredibly suffocating.
But here's the thing. The narcissist rarely works alone. To avoid being placed on the hot seat themselves, siblings are groomed into joining the abuse as enablers and, as they're often called, flying monkeys. The narcissist actively orchestrates this sibling rivalry specifically to prevent any unity and keep the scrutiny entirely off their own pathology. This alienates the scapegoat completely. It leaves them feeling totally isolated in a house full of phantoms.
Moving on to part 4, shredding the imaginary contract.
Okay, so how do you actually unplug from this toxic system and transition from being a victim to an empowered thriver? Well, it starts with a phrase you might know all too well. Sit down, shut up, and take it. That toxic fine print clause represents the imaginary contract forced upon the scapegoat from childhood. It's this unspoken, invisible agreement that mandates you must quietly serve the family's needs forever. Healing requires you to actively identify this contract, realize you never willingly signed it, and then definitively shred it. To actually do that, you need a massive core cognitive shift. You have to accept that there is simply nothing to correct. I know, this is a huge stumbling block for so many people, but healing demands this radical realization that yesterday is gone forever. You can't fix the past, and you definitely cannot change the narcissist because their pathology is fixed. Releasing that powerful urge to somehow correct the system, that is the absolute only path to your freedom.
And that brings us to part 5, the Thriver's Toolkit.
Now, we want to equip you with a structured action plan to reclaim your identity and establish your long overdue personal autonomy. First and foremost, implementing no contact. Let me be perfectly clear about this. Physical and emotional separation is not an act of spite. It's really not about punishing the narcissist or burning a bridge. Honestly, the narcissist burned that bridge long ago through their continuous abuse. Going no contact is the ultimate vital protocol for your own self-preservation.
But what if contact is absolutely unavoidable? That brings us to the gray rock method. You have to practice strict emotional discipline to become as uninteresting, unresponsive, and boring as a literal gray rock. The entire goal here is to actively starve the narcissist of their desired emotional supply. By choosing to logically respond rather than emotionally react, you force the abuser to just get bored and look somewhere else for their fuel.
Let's look at how this all builds into long-term healing. You've got to overwrite that old subconscious script, and you do this by utilizing your GPS, your goals with purpose. You define your personal vision, and you set firm, totally non-negotiable boundaries. You actively learn how to release toxic energy and build a trusting, healthy support base. By channeling your own positive energy toward your goals, you actively delete your childhood grooming. You transition from being a human wastebasket into a luminous star.
I want to leave you with this final thought as you step out of the matrix and begin writing the rest of your story. Will you remain bound to the false self-image of a broken system, or will you write your own epilogue and reclaim your unshakable purpose? Your life is a profound gift.
So today, we're going to dive into something really powerful, and for a lot of people, deeply personal. We're talking about the journey to find emotional freedom after a narcissistic relationship. And let me tell you, it's not about some big, dramatic Hollywood exit. It's about a quiet, internal shift that honestly changes everything. And this quote, man, it just nails the feeling, doesn't it? Freedom from a toxic situation, it's not this huge explosion. It's that first, quiet, deep breath you take after you realize you've been holding it for years. It's that slow realization that this massive weight you were carrying, it's finally
finally starting to lift. So how do you even know you're on that path? How can you tell it's really happening? Well, it's probably not what you're thinking. The signs are super subtle, they're internal, but they are incredibly profound. They're the little clues that show you're not just physically out of there, but you're starting to get emotionally unhooked. Okay, so let's start with that quiet shift, the personal move away from all that chaos and toward a sense of peace you might have forgotten was even possible. This right here, this is the absolute core of it. Real freedom is when your emotional compass finally starts pointing back to you. It's that moment you stop living your life based on their moods and their needs, and you start asking, wait a minute, what do I need? All right, so how does this internal shift actually look in real life? Well, a really powerful video from Luminousz Ztarr Fables breaks it down into 3 key signs that show you're really, truly done. Okay, this first one is huge. It's that moment you realize, you know what, I don't need their apology. I don't need their big explanation or for them to finally get it. You realize that closure isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself, and it was always yours to give in the first place. The second sign, it's all about energy. You lose the desire. You look at that toxic dynamic, all the drama, the ups and downs, and you just think, I am not investing one more ounce of my energy into this black hole. You know it's a broken system, so you just opt out. And number 3, this is where you become emotionally bulletproof to their chaos. You know when they try to suck you into their latest self-manufactured crisis, you just don't bite anymore. You're no longer available for the drama, and it is a total game changer. In fact, there's a really well-known tactic for this. It's called the gray rock method. And honestly, it's as simple as it sounds. When they come at you trying to get a rise out of you, you just become, a boring gray rock. You give short, uninteresting answers, no emotion, nothing for them to latch onto. Eventually, they get bored and go look for their supplies somewhere else. Okay, so knowing the signs is one thing, but how do you actually stay the course when things get tough? Let's talk about 3 super simple, but really powerful mental tools to keep you focused. Think of these as your new personal mantras. First, remind yourself, your life has its own purpose, and it is not to be a supporting character in their never-ending drama. Second, and you really gotta let this one sink in, you are not responsible for their well-being. That's their job, not yours. And finally, you make a conscious choice to just stop. Discontinue all emotional investment. Now, what's so fascinating is that this isn't just happening to individuals in private. This whole idea is exploding into a huge cultural movement, and it's being led by survivors themselves. Right now, all over social media, you're seeing this massive shift. People are realizing that choosing to detach isn't weak. It's a radical, powerful act of self-rescue. Survivors are basically saying, nope, I'm not waiting around for an apology. I'm taking my peace back right now. And the scale of this is just staggering. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of views on videos that break this stuff down. This isn't just some niche trend. It's a massive, collective aha moment. It's showing so many people that what they're going through, they are definitely not alone. And like any movement, it has its own language, its own anthems. You see these phrases, these viral mantras, all over what some people are calling narc talk. Things like, their chaos is not your calling, or you are not responsible for their healing. And one of my favorites, detachment is love turned inward. They're like these little anchors that pull you back to yourself when you start to drift. Okay, but let's get specific. What do we really mean by detachment? Because it's so important to understand that this is not about becoming a cold, heartless person. It's actually a really sophisticated skill for self-preservation and empowerment. This table lays it out perfectly. Detachment has layers. There's the mental layer. You stop blaming yourself and start seeing their tactics for what they are. There's the physical layer, literally creating space to keep yourself safe and get some peace. Then you have the emotional layer, and this one is huge. It's choosing to respond calmly instead of having that knee-jerk reaction. And finally, the spiritual layer, where you start to reconnect with who you are and what you're worth. And that emotional piece brings us to this critical distinction, reacting versus responding. See, reacting is what they want. It's emotional, it's impulsive, it's you giving them all your power on a silver platter. But responding, that's different. That's thoughtful. It's calm. It's taking a beat before you answer. And that reclaims your power. That is what they fear the most, your indifference. You know, when you boil it all down, the entire journey is captured in this one massive shift of a question. Survivors used to ask, why me? Why did this happen to me?
But now, the question is changing. Now they're asking, what do I need to heal? And that simple switch, from looking for answers out there to finding them in here, well, that's it. That's the quiet, powerful beginning of your own freedom.